encara tenim una última caminada que farà l'Isaac Camps amb la interpretació de Charles Lyell i aquell passeig per la Moixina, un territori i un paratge magnífic. Comencem ara amb la xerrada magistral de tancament que ens farà l'Ezio Vaccari. És una xerrada magistral perquè l'Ezio Vaccari, ara veureu, és una persona brillant a nivell acadèmic, a nivell institucional, amb una llarga trajectòria i per tant era adient iniciar, tancar amb una xerrada d'aquest estil. De tota manera, després hi haurà una taula rodona sobre el gabinet de curiositats. Ho hem fet a la inversa, és a dir, no hem posat la xerrada de tancament al final, sinó que hem posat el gabinet de curiositats al final perquè ens semblava interessant mantenir un relat viu del que és la història de la ciència, de què és el gabinet de curiositats, de què és tot aquest paradigma per la ciutat d'Olot que, gràcies i en el context d'aquesta trobada i d'aquestes jornades, ens serveix a nosaltres també com a pretext per seguir treballant en aquesta línia. És a dir, ja s'està fent també aquesta feina de recuperació, de restauració del gabinet i ens interessa sobretot promocionar aquesta recerca en aquest àmbit, que per tant, aquí fa el cap publicitari, si hi ha algun investigador a la sala que vulgui promoure alguna línia de recerca en aquesta línia, doncs benvingut serà i tota la col·laboració per part del consistori en aquest sentit. Anem per començar, perquè anem ja uns minuts tardet, amb aquesta xerrada que s'intitularà Els reptes interdisciplinaris de la història de les ciències de la Terra. L'Ezio Vaccari és un professor titular de Història de les Ciències i les Tècniques i director del Centre de Recerca sobre la història de les muntanyes, la cultura dels materials i les ciències de la Terra de la Universitat d'Insubria, del Varese, Itàlia. És president de la Comissió Internacional d'Història de les Ciències Geològiques i va ser president de la Societat Italiana d'Història de la Ciència del 2018 al 2020, any també en què va rebre el Premi Mary Rabbit d'Història i Filosofia de la Geologia de la Societat Geològica d'Amèrica. La seva recerca s'ha centrat en la història de les ciències de la Terra, la història de la comunicació científica i la història de la cultura material a les zones de muntanya. Ha treballat a Alemanya, Irlanda, Àustria, França, als Estats Units i, òbviament, també a París i a Itàlia. Ha participat en més de 150 conferències, ha publicat 4 monografies i més de 130 assaigs en revistes, llibres, articles i actes en congressos. Per tant, una persona que té un currículum brillant i ens omple d'orgull poder-lo tenir aquí. Endavant, Ezio, quan vulguis. Moltes gràcies.
Gracias. Bon dia y gracias per la invitación a la Trobada. And this is all my Catalan today. Today, I would like also to thank very much the presentation and in particular for the invitation Joel Piqué and la Societat Catalana di Storia della Ciència y de la Tècnica. And I would like to thank also Faberlul, this very nice residence, for the opportunity to spend some days here in Olot, which allow me to discover a wonderful place, a wonderful landscape, with a great potential, a really great potential, but I think also in relation to what I will present you today. I had thought to present certain kind of topics, but then, living here for a few days, I shaped and changed a bit my presentation, thinking of the place where I'm being invited, which is completely surrounded by geology, volcanology, and history. Quick introduction about myself. Well, it's already been said a lot, very nice, but I would like to just stress my background. I am an historian. Not a geologist. I'm an historian of geology, an historian of science. I got a degree in humanities, in lettere, in Italian, in history in particular. But then I got trained in geology by a very good professor at the time at the University of Genova in stratigraphy in particular. And then I got a PhD in history of science. So I try to follow this interdisciplinary path myself in a period that was very difficult to go from one side to another of the two cultures. Just for mentioning, it was not an aspect in the late 80s and in the early 90s when I studied. It was quite difficult for somebody who, in Italy who had a degree in history to do a PhD in science, or the opposite side, which is something that now has been changed, but interdisciplinarity was definitely a challenge itself. I started to study the history of geology and earth sciences 35 years ago now, and I still have the same passion for this topic as I had at the beginning, because I consider that a very open field. What I like in the history of science is that there are areas very much open to studies and to interactions. And when I started, the reason why I didn't choose Galilean studies, for example, where there were so many historians already young and old working on these big figures, or history of medicine or other field more studied, I decided to do geology for a simple reason, that it was a real open field. And it was also ready to give me many challenges, sometimes quite difficult, because I realized very soon that we are working on the edge of several disciplines. We are in the middle, in a sort of no man's land, no? Terra di nessuno. And, sorry, sometime I can use Italian, maybe. I realized that most of the Catalan people I met speak perfect Italian, very good Italian, I understand, so forgive me if sometime I will use Italian words. But so anyway, my talk will be outlined in 3 parts. The first part is just a general presentation of the discipline for the one of you that don't know what's the history of earth sciences in its general way. The state of the art is a very ambitious task for a few minutes. Then I will try to give you an outline of what is the challenges, so the title of my talk for the present and for the future, and then I will finish with a significant case of interdisciplinary project. So let's start with the state of the art. And the history of earth science certainly is the most recent discipline, one of the most recent disciplines in the history of science. Well, history of earth sciences is actually more general than history of geological sciences, so because it includes also other disciplines that study not only the surface, but also the interior or the above. So we have meteorology, we have geophysics in this big, broad definition, history of earth sciences. We have hydrology. Otherwise, within the geological sciences, we look to geology, paleontology, mineralogy, geomorphology as well, physical geography. So I like the broader sense of this term. It's a recent discipline anyway, because it started quite late compared to other history of sciences. Certainly, we cannot find a real tradition of history of earth sciences before the middle of the 20th century. There are certainly important texts and beginning of interest in history. We've been talking about Lyell, mentioned Lyell several times, also recently for the walk up to the volcano above here. But Lyell was actually one of the first who tried to sketch an historical reconstruction of this discipline. But he did that in a very non-historical way, let's say, because he was bringing everything to himself, a bit like Darwin did the same in the third edition of the Origin of Species. So, an history built in order to arrive to what the scientists had to say in this important book, of course, but not a balanced history. So, recent discipline. Then we have a still small but growing community. I still remember when I joined this group in the early 1990s, being welcomed by Martin Rodwig at the time, and still is one of our best historian of geology, coming from paleontology and stratigraphy and moved to history, but nobody realized that. He's considered a great historian for the methodology he used. But he welcomed me with these words: welcome to the small band of the historian of geology. small band, small group. No? We still are a small group, but the interaction are very strong. Geoscientists and historians are part of this community. Geologists, historians call themselves from the scientific side, historians of geology from the other side. We have different research methods and we have different sources, which makes the history of earth sciences a field open to use any kind of possible source in history, including a material source, as I will explain very briefly later. And then we have a great variety of topics. And of course, the interdisciplinarity is not just a word, it's a practice, has to be a practice. The simple way of going into the field in order to understand and see what we now call geologists of the past have seen is absolutely fundamental. It cannot be done sitting on the table and looking at books. Geology started as a science, as a discipline in the late 18th century because some people of that period started to say that it was impossible to do this new science sitting inside a cabinet. No? They used to call it naturalisti da tavolino. Naturalisti da tavolino in Italian means naturalists who just study writing closed in the little library and never see the surface, the landscape, the features. So this idea of the fieldwork already started in the 18th century, and for us as historians, it's very important to work within this fieldwork and understand what it is. So to have a practice in geology is very important. Then, of course, the outreach, the results of all this research is included in publications, meetings, and excursions. So let's see, just very briefly, an outline of the community itself. I just used this webpage, which is the one of the International Commission of the History of Geological Sciences, we mentioned before. It's a commission of the Union of the Geological Sciences, but is also affiliated to the Union of History and Philosophy of Sciences and Technology, Division of History of Science and Technology. This affiliation started practically at the same time. Sometimes our geologist friends forget about that. We started as a commission of the IUGS, the Geologist Union, in 1967 in Yerevan, at the time of Soviet Union, in Armenia. And certainly it was a big initiative from the geological side of some countries, Eastern countries, mainly Russia, Soviet Union, but also some European countries and United States. But just 1 year after, in Paris, there was this affiliation to the International Union of History and Philosophy of Science. The partnership we have is quite important with the History of Science Society, the History of Earth Sciences Society. And then there is some facts that I can just briefly outline. I won't read all our mission, which is this, and the fact that there are a membership quite active, but it's about 300 people around the world, 57 countries, annual conferences. Geohistorical field trips is the aspect I will look in more in detail because it's related to the topic of interdisciplinarity practice. And then publications, a journal, the contribution to geological journal as well as history of science journal and historical journals, webinars and so on. So it's a commission, but it's also a group of people, not an association. The people doesn't pay a fee for being member. It has to be nominated within the commission by the board and represent different countries around the world. I can say that this is one of our tasks. Sorry, I'm just too fast. One of our tasks is certainly produce a series of information. Originally, this commission had the task to produce bibliographical tools on history of geological sciences. This was done in the 1970s in big volumes, only printed, very difficult to find now, by a very few very active members, particularly for Canada. And now, one of the tasks is go back to this information, because it's very important to provide information to the series of users of knowledge in history of geology. History of earth sciences or history of geological sciences is not just an academic, scholarly field. It's too much involved and linked to the land, the territories, and the people who live in the land, and so considering all the problems and the issues of the contemporary world, this is one of our duty, or has to be one of our duty. Of course, in constant relation with the scientific side and many other cultures. If we look at the professions and the skills of these people who, young and less young, senior and junior, PhD student or early career scholars and so, we found a great variety. That's another aspect, the social aspects, let's say, of the community. Not only geoscientists, although the geologists were absolutely the majority at the beginning. There were very few historians of science, in spite of the early affiliation to the History of Science Union. But then this gap was balanced. And there are also scholars now who are coming from research institutes and universities in disciplines such as philosophy, sociology, literature. And then people working in museums, which is quite an important field, and libraries and archives. So they deal with sources, very important, material and written. Teachers and local scholars of different level. And this is a very important, potentially very good interdisciplinary basis. I think this can happen also in higher societies. But again, this is not a society, it's a commission which has to represent different countries in the world. In fact, we have to go to these big meetings every 4 years. They are called the International Geological Congresses, and next year will be the same in New Zealand for the history of science. Of course, if we have an interdisciplinary basis like this, people of different provenance, different skills, different background, different age, you need to make it work. It's not just enough that you have them, you have to put them together. Put them work together, put them understand together. For years, when I was younger, one of the younger members of the commission, we've been told that we needed more younger people. But if you look for younger people, then you have to also to involve them in a certain way, to give them the chance to do things, to be part of the group. And if the group is too much unbalanced towards the elderly, senior, very good scholars, but a bit at the end of their career. And then there is another problem that the geologists consider our commission within all the other geological commission like a sort of little cherry on the cake. No? You finish your career and you start history. Typical old geologists that do this, no? It's not only that. It's never been only that. There are young faces, both in history and in geology. And if there is older and senior members who want to do history because at the end of their career of field work and so on, they want to give their experience to the history community, that's great. No preclusion, no barriers. But you have to build this interdisciplinarity, make people talk, make people do things that both things are important. Otherwise, you remain in the comfort zone, specialized knowledge. I'm studying this man, this particular scientist all my life, and I'm happy with this. Or I'm doing history of this particular discipline, stratigraphy, paleontology, or just, for example, Spanish volcanology for all my life. No. You stay in the comfort zone, you don't react, you don't interact, and it doesn't work at that stage. Certainly, one of the main debates is this. Is better to be insider or to be outsider? Big question in history of geological science, because geologists say usually that for doing history of geology, you have to be a geologist. When I was young PhD student, I received this comment a few times. And it's interesting to know the fact that sometimes I got completely misunderstood in my origin, and somebody told me, you did geology. No, I learned geology. I had not a degree, no? But I'm happy that you told me I'm like a geologist, because, well, that means I learned. But that's you have to do the same. As a geologist, you have to learn the methodology and the skills of history. So in this way, we constantly debate, is better insider geologist who do history of geology, or outsider, historian, sociologist, philosopher, expert in literature, humanities, let's say, who does geology. In 1994, there was an interesting conference in San Diego, organized by the Geological Society of America, about this topic. And there was an incredible long discussion, never-ended discussion among the people who attended. That continued also years after. In 2014, the colleagues from the United States did the same, and we all went to see what happened after 20 years. And Martin Rodwig again wrote this article about insiders and outsiders, and the debate is still going on. It's a positive that we discuss that. There is not a real answer, definitive answer, is better one or the other. We have different background, we have to collaborate. Interdisciplinarity means this, understanding each other at the same level, not one at the top of the other. And then there is another problem, which is more historiographical, and probably who of you have been dealing with the problem of historiography can recognize some of this topic. The Dutch historian of science, Reyer Roykas, wrote in the 1982, at the end of the meeting of Inigeo in Paris in 1981, this paper, Pitfalls in the Historiography of Geological Sciences, which is still very, very actual, I would say, not old at all, not obsolete. There are problems we still encounter in different countries. Young and old scholars can face this problem. And what are the problems that historian of geology can do, and not a very good history sometimes, if they fall in these traps, in these pitfalls. One of them is to create heroes. We had too many heroes. I always joke that geology had too many fathers. There are fathers everywhere, no? One here, one in Italy, one in England, too many English fathers, too many pioneers. We don't have to create this myth of people, because that diminishes all the context of the people who worked in history and history of science. We know that they can give contribution as well. The people who lose their battle, we cannot just look at the winners of this. But this is a topic in history of science which is quite debated. I'm not saying anything new. History of geology has a problem with hero worship and also with group chauvinism. Emphasize too much people from your own country, and not because you are under a regime which forces you to do so. In Italy in the 1920s, 1930s, there was an exaggeration of exceedingly exaggerating the importance of the Italian scientists. And that was very bad, because the Italian scientists were doing very well in the 18th century, for example, geology. But in this way, were completely hidden by this propaganda. No? Then there is another problem, also the feeling of superiority toward the predecessor. So I am a geologist, or I am an historian who knows how things are now, and I look in a sort of presentist or Whiggish way the past, and I consider it completely what Lyell did, what Darwin did, what this 19th century early historian of natural sciences did mainly, because they considered themselves at the end of the long route, or the long path, no? Saying the right important thing. So the history has to be a sort of a previous small anticipation before the arrival of the final synthesis. Okay? If we do this now, of course, it's a problem, Whiggism or presentism. I'm quoting Rodwig quite often, but he wrote some very important lines about our discipline and about the interdisciplinarity problem of the earth science, of the history of geology. This is his last book, and it's a popular book, very, very good to read for people who's not an expert in history of geology or history of science. But his introduction of this book, published in 2014, he says, in conclusion, I must emphasize that this book is based, as any such work should be, not only on my own historical research, but also on the research of many other historians of many nationalities, most of published in recent decades and in several languages. Rodwig, I remember, it was very interesting to read Italian, to read French, to read Spanish, to read all the other languages that he didn't have, being an English speaker, because he wanted to know from the original sources. Because this needs to be emphasized, because all this modern research by historians of science is too often blithely ignored. Not by the other historians of science, of course, but look at that, but best underutilized, with a few honorable exceptions, by the authors of popular science books, which now are selling a lot. If you look at the market of popular science, it's growing and growing and growing, like the presence of science in the media. Think about how many new movies are dealing with science. And who writes the screenplay? Where this information come from? Rodwig at his age, he's very old now, is able to understand this problem of our time. And he says, authors of popular science books, makers of TV science programs, in England, of course, they have a BBC, they have many. He said, most seriously by scientists who pronounce on the history of their own sciences. And here is a little provoking the scientist as himself. They all seem to prefer to stay in a cozy comfort zone of recycled myths. The great scientist, only him or her can be discussed, and so on, with an unattractively chauvinistic and sexist flavor, singling out the father of this or the father of that. No? All the fathers again. Now, I have to go a bit, of course, quick with this presentation of the state of the art, but there are already some challenges here. We have different methods in the history of earth sciences. Some are old, some are still new, still actual debated question. I just give you a few examples of these debates. For example, we already discussed the internal or the external history, but also it's better to focus on science, just on concepts, or it's better to focus on context. If you talk as an historian know what context mean. If you talk with scientists, sometimes this aspect has to be explained a bit better because they look directly to the ideas, to the concept in the books, and they don't consider the scientist as a person who lived in a particular world. Okay? Then we have, the questions are open, but there are lots of answers. Scientific revolution or scientific controversies, the model of scientific revolution in geology doesn't work very much compared to physics, astronomy, or other sciences. We're talking about a big revolution in earth sciences in the middle of the 20th century, plate tectonics. Maybe. Anthony Hallamer wrote a book about that. He's a geologist who had a very, very good sensibility for history, but again, it's open discussion. But not certainly during the scientific revolution of the 17th century. Where is geology there? Didn't exist even as a discipline, no? So, talking about Thomas Kuhn and all the other models about this. Or it's better to consider scientific controversies, but also these controversies are a problem. I read books talking about Neptunism in the middle of the 18th century, when Neptunism is a concept of the end of the century and used only in certain contexts, Germany mainly, England. In Italy, we're using volcanists, for many geologists who pretended that the geological phenomena are due to volcanoes. Neptunists were called diluvialists. The water is the main cause of phenomena. So it's better history ideas or material history. Use all the concepts or use the tools, the objects, the instruments, the specimens, the rocks, the minerals, which are incredibly useful sources. It's better biographical or institutional studies. It's better to study single figures or to study, for example, an academy of science or an institution. They're all questions which are also cannot be applied in other fields of history or science, of course. But they're all open in the history of geology. And it's better to study in detail some small document, a primary source, or to go directly to a wide interpretation of a phenomenon. No? When you go to a conference, even here in these days, there are talks about specific sources and talks about general views. And again, it's better a philological or a comparative approach. Now, my answer to all these questions is not that one of the other it's better. I will not polarize radicalize the question. I will accept both in different ways, of course, both possible answers to every question. I don't know what you think, but that is what I feel for our discipline in particular. And what are the forms and the topics we are treating? Forms can be general and disciplinary histories. Chronologically, that means the general history of geology or the general history of stratigraphy, no? Written by a certain number of authors starting from the 1960s, okay, until now. Another form is the one chronologically or geographically oriented, so you have the 18th century geology, the 18th century stratigraphy, the 19th century geomorphology, and so on, or geographical studies, for example, in Europe, or in some region of Europe, or areas of Europe, or nations of Europe, or other parts of the world. The biography is very important. We have a big tradition of biographies, single figures being studied in detail. I started myself with a study on a single figure. It was a very important figure in order to understand the context and development of a particular size of the science in Italy during the science of geology in Italy during the 18th century. So I consider it a tool, but it didn't become my only mission for the full career of studies. In other cases, instead, this happens. Then there are institutional studies on museums, surveys, geological surveys, academies, societies, universities, observatories. I listen and talk about the Fabra Observatory, for example, or laboratories, research bodies. So this is evident in any case. And then there are thematic studies on fossils, on minerals, on strata, volcanoes. In this area, of course, it's predominant aspect. Although I don't think, I was looking for an history of volcanology based on research in this area of Spain or in other parts, which maybe go beyond the reference to the Lyell important visit in this area. And it fascinates me because it's a real area where volcanoes and volcanology emerges everywhere, even looking at the ground. We've just been on to the volcano Monzacopa, Isaac, wonderfully guided by Isaac Camps, and I just realized that everywhere. But is there a history of volcanology of this area? There are many other histories missing, I think, in different contexts. Then another aspect much followed now is also the waves of communication. Popular science, different languages, journals, periodicals for the period pre-media, pre-digital media, but now they're also the early digital media, the early television, movies, and so there started to be sources to be studied by some projects. So relationship with other research and fields and discipline is what actually we need. We need to go to this aspect. And now, as I say, until the late 1960s, we had occasional work. Sometimes they were not particularly deeply in the research. In some other case, we found instead a new book which opened the view and the research. I just show you a very few cover of books. 1969, the very early study in geomorphology in the British Islands, Rodwick on the history of paleontology, and then again, The Making of Geology in Britain, 1977. This is an Italian book by a historian of ideas and philosophy, Paolo Rossi, on history of the idea on the ground. An historian of geology in Italy like Nicoletta Morello, who wrote about her research in history of paleontology in the 17th century. And then again, many other books, as you can see, talking about history of geology in a certain period or against in particular area of this research, like Gabriel Goho worked much on the history of mountain formation and mountain building. I go very quick because this is just an example of all this enormous amount of literature based, as I told you, in this way. There are also the correspondence, of course. Primary sources like letters are very important and still needs to be very much investigated compared to other sciences where there are more correspondences put in form of clear understanding of all the aspects of a letter, with all the detail, with all the footnotes. I worked on this figure, Giovanni Arduino, but there is also other example like the one by Pietro Corsi on the scientific correspondence in the 19th century between Pisa, Paris, and London. And then we have connection with literature, because this author, Noah Herringman from the United States, he wrote about relationship with geology and romantic literature. And then again, Ralph O'Connor from Edinburgh, instead in Scotland, he worked on this aspect of the communication of science in the 19th century, the Ayrton show, and the poetics of popular science. There are several also now, these are the most recent publications I just chosen as an example, which are recovering the importance of the antiquity as they give a new view of how in the antiquity the idea of deep time was already expressed. And then the INIGEO has produced a series of proceedings on topics, as you can see, exploration of oil gas, visual concepts, so maps and cartography, geology and religion, history of geomorphology. There is also, in the middle here, the history, research, and mineral resources at the Congress we had here in Spain, in Madrid, in 2010, I think, so, and then in Portugal. And again, several topics concerning also travel, concerning fieldwork, concerning areas of the world, like the Pacific-Asia context, or the Latin America, or the 20th century. Volcanoes and history was the topic we treated in 1995, but the volcanoes, for example, the volcanology is coming back very often. History of concept in Precambrian geology, very specific, particular field of studies. It was a congress in Canada in 1972, and so on. Many others examples that now I will go quickly to show you. As you can see, also journals in history of science, or as in these two cases, have produced the proceedings of history of earth sciences, looking at disciplinary crossing points. For example, in Varese, we had a meeting on history of communication in geology and history of studies on mountain environment, as the two topics very different to each other, but interesting, integrated, and so on. Then an aspect we did very much in the series of Congress is to create a series of field trips at the end of the Congress, which is a very geological way. Every Congress in geology has their own excursion because they're going to see the formation, the outcrops, and so on. So what we do as historian of geology, we use this model, but we transfer in the reconstruction of geo-historical routes, which is a different concept and very difficult one. And it's the one I would like to mainly emphasize later. So you can see an example of these guidebooks that we had in different fieldwork in Varese or in other parts of the world. Now, some potential challenges, what we can have in this way. Well, writing and publishing books and papers where we can discuss and share ideas, interpretation, and try to transfer this knowledge in teaching is certainly a lot of work, okay? The academic work, writing, meeting at the Congress, and even transferring teaching is what I'm trying to do. I have a course, general course in history of science and technology, but I have a course in history of mountains. And there is the place where I transfer the history of geology as much as I can, because we don't have in my university a geology course which can geology degree course, which can have an history of geology as a discipline. Other colleagues are luckier than me, maybe. But this is important, but it's not enough. We have to go to more challenge. And here I present you the challenges. I'm firmly convinced that our potential are not only confined within strictly scholarly activities, but we can, for example, support the increase of the environmental and cultural awareness. All this worriness about climate change, of course, about increase of natural phenomena, with all the spectacularization maybe given also by the media, and then very terrible events like what happened also here, terrible events that we read about. What history can do about that? The history of earth sciences, the history of geology. We need to tackle evaluate these contemporary issues. For example, the definition of Anthropocene is another aspect which has been discussed by geologists and by people from humanities. But it needs also to be looked in carefully in detail, looking at the history of this idea or concept of epochs in geology before to arrive too quick to a conclusion positive or negative, and again to make the debate radical. So I'm just saying that history can use also to calm down the very fast way we are using now for understanding phenomena and worrying about phenomena and worrying about what can happen. So if history of geology talks with different disciplines, by default and by its own means, it also needs to move and talk differently to modern science and society. There is the need to go over this relationship between historian and geologist and go to a more wider relation between historian, geologist, but also media, administrators of the land, of the territories, in order to understand better this problem. The challenges. Well, today my challenge was to climb the mountain before, because I tell you the challenges of the historians, especially a certain age, it's to follow the geologists on the field. Because they bring you to see also the historical geological sites, but you have to be fit. So this is a joke, of course, but it's not too much a joke, it's actually true. But I will start with saying that interdisciplinary approach is actually the main challenge in every sense, because it's a word, again, we need to put him in practice. And we need to change the habit to be constantly ready to work in a teamwork, which is very important. If you don't able to work in a teamwork, it doesn't work, even to start to talk about interdisciplinarity. And then you need another word, which is mutual understanding. At the same level, you have to be the same level of importance, of respect. For the historian of geology, certainly one future challenging can certainly be the support, the trend already in action. In the last few decades, we had the trends very strong in focus from the normal sources, research papers, books, manuscripts, letters, drawings, maps, and so on, to a new kind of source, objects, tools, specimens, and places, including roots. So the topic is an interdisciplinary new attention for new source has to be include places and roots, sites and roots. But there is also another aspect which can be considered a challenge, which is to enlarge the borders of the geohistorical research, increasing the focus on the role of the so-called forgotten people and forgotten places. We have a young historiography which has neglected too long women, for example, contribution to geology or earth sciences, but also technical figures. Miners, for example, all the people from mining are extremely important, and technicians of different regions, local people. We need to also completely change the too much Eurocentric perspective and go to other worlds quite soon to understand what it means there, understanding the planet of the Earth. Otherwise, again, we tackle in a wrong way the problem that we have now in our contemporary world. And then it's not important at all, I always say that to my colleagues, in particular geologists, establish, for example, a priority between certain discoveries between, for example, Italian or English geology, but to understand more about the early studies, for example, in the Southern Asia, that we don't know very little about. Support more interaction with the history of technology, and a bit less interaction with the history of ideas and the history of philosophy, which has been very strong in several schools of research. Another important challenge is the aim to establish a different dialogue with the sciences, which is based on the historical data and historical analysis. We provide, as historians, several data to research ongoing, for example, in seismology, for data about earthquakes, or volcanology as well, data about eruptions and so. But history should not be just a source which provides data for science. What actually needs to be understood by both sides is that the history of geological science and in general other science which deal with nature and it can be used for understanding natural phenomena today is also evaluation with the knowledge of historical context. What means at that time we studied and we extract the data, the term earthquake, for example, or intensity of an earthquake if it exists, before to transfer this data directly on an intensity map or in a catalog of volcano eruption and so on, you know. So this is important. You need an history of geological sciences not simply at the service of the science, but as partner, proponent at the same level. Again, teamwork. Finally, there is a change, there is this aspect here that is the one I would like to stress now in the last part of the presentation. And this can create fruitful interaction between scientists, historians, general public, and above all with the local communities, local administrators, and the so-called stakeholders. It is the identification of geohistorical sites and geohistorical routes, which can give an effective contribution to what we now call more often geoheritage, with the possibility application on the geotourism. So the definition of this latter change is definitely what we have done with the project, and this is the last part, no? When I was going to give you this example of this project. Started in 2022 with another commission of the International Union of Geological Sciences, the Commission on Geoheritage, and they decided to start a big project on the IGS geological heritage sites. And the role of history was immediately understood as essential. And this is very important because that came from the people working in geoheritage, not from the historian of geology. We were involved in this, and the community was very responsive in this, very positive. And I must say that now the geological community has realized the importance of the historical value in order to define, for example, a geosite. And here you can see first chapter of these books and all these projects are all devoted to historical geosite. But the problem is that we need more attention to define the historical geosite and georoutes, which, again, can provide tools for geotourism and revaluation of territories. I'm thinking what can happen also in a territory like this, so much wonderfully involved in volcanology from all the aspects of the landscape, if you start to create also a connection with the historical roots and research, which has already started because Lyell, Tripp, and Pat in this area has been studied and reconstructed. No? So just a few words about the geosites of historical relevance. These geosites of historical relevance is a great importance because it allows to recognize, you can see the definition here, the foundation, the development, but also the scientific potential of the geological sciences, as well as their role in the human society. This is a definition we have given as a Commission of History of Geology, and it fits perfectly with the definition of geoheritage site, which was before. It was actually declared in Zumaya, in the Basque Country, in October 2022, in this big meeting presenting. So these are milestones for us. The word history at the end of this definition is a milestone. It creates this interaction which we needed officially also. So we create also this other aspect, this other definition of geohistorical site. And there are so many. The picture you will see now quickly, they will show you how much material there is we can study. But all this material is still now printed, pictures, drawings. So the classic sources of the historians of geology or science. What we are now wanting to do is to improve increase this material with the places. And the places can be taken with a picture, with the understanding of the formation of crops, like here. You see some lovely formation of the volcano above this crater is beautiful, no? But the roots is the other step. How this material, this landscape, this knowledge, this discovery were gradually understood. In which way, and how we can do the same today also for people who doesn't know anything about geology. So again, the history, as you know, of geosciences is not only theories, is also places. I will go this part of the presentation of this not only archival documents, but above all place, roots, landscape, which has been described, studied, understood, interpreted by scholars and scientists since the origins of the science of geology, so since between 18th and 19th century, which is a fascinating period with great number of images, very effective in communicating extraordinary features within ordinary environment and common people. Here, for example, you see common people nearby this area of beautiful basaltic formations. This is Venetian Prealps near Vicenza. And you can see people and shepherds together with scientists looking at the area. The increasing of the travels, the increasing of the field work is another aspect, because they help us to understand all these travels of the 18th and the 19th century in particular, and to find these places. The discovery of the landscape, the discovery of the formation of the particular concept as well. Here, for example, you see the drawing of a main feature of an outcrop in Scotland, a very famous outcrop of near the outcrop of Siccar Point, is not the same. And it has an enormous importance for the study of the folds in the 18th century and later. And then you have historical sites that they may have a strong potential because they have been important for literature, for arts, for tourism, and so on, for modern. This place here, the Fingal Cave in Scotland, was mainly a place for travelers who wanted to see this magnificent cave with all these basalts, columnar basalts. And there was still a little bit of geology at the beginning of all these travels. But then they became an iconic area for studying the basalts in particular. The basalt intrusions like this in France. In some way, these sites that I show you very quickly can be considered like open laboratories for understanding the behavior of the earth, for understanding the geological phenomena, for understanding the feature. And the original roots of its early fieldwork can be reconstructed following research in history of geological sciences. To reconstruct and repeat these travels or this excursion of the past is what Rodwig has called in his last paper the retrading of early geological fieldwork. This is a wonderful paper which put together all what we have been discussing for so long. No? And in the field of historiography of science, you may try to find this connection. We can call this experimental history of science, of geology. I mean, I know the experimental history of science is more commonly used in medicine, for example, when you try to redo the experiments in the field of medicine or biology. But you can do also in geology, but it's a different way. You don't do it in the laboratory, you do retrading, following with the same eyes and the same mentality, as more as you can, the travel of the past. And I would say fair play to Isaac, for example, who wrote this paper about the patrimonio geologico here in Catalonia, no? Trying to do again the retrading of the roots of Lyell here in the area. No? Each geological heritage site has its own history because it was discovered or identified at a certain date, and it has been studied through the years. So every site has an history. That is clear, of course. No? But attention, historical geosites, in the way we consider, is not just a site with a history, but it's a site that has made history. Okay? For example, Siccar Point in Scotland, or other area where some theories were put in place for the very first time. So the same is for volcanology, for example. So maybe here, in a lot, in this wonderful area, volcanological area, maybe there was not maybe a new volcanological theory, or maybe there was. But even if there was not volcanological theory which changed the course of the history, this is important site for the understanding of this science. But of course, if you want to look for the real historical geosite, you need a real geosite where the history has changed. It has to be a sort of landmark in history of science and the milestone for modern geology. And then we have, of course, sites which are not yet they're not being completely found and investigated. When I started research on this topic, this area here near the Valdagno, near the Prealps in Veneto, northeastern Italy, was considered by all the historians of geology the birthplace of stratigraphy. So all the colleagues from geology was pushing me to, because I wrote a book on this man, Giovanni Arduino, who made this sketch in 1758. It's true. He started the subdivision on primary, secondary, tertiary unit. He started a path which now called stratigraphy. It was only lithostratigraphy without fossils or very few fossils. It's important. But the valley is a valley of 20 kilometers long, very complicated. Try to retrace all his search, it was not so easy, all his paths, all his field work. It takes time, it takes teamwork. We eventually found a better knowledge after some years and produced a proposal for a geosite in this sense, which of course now is welcomed also by the local community, by the local museum, by the guides of the excursion, of the trails around this wonderful, nice place in the Prealps. So the series of results, a series of consequences which are positive for the land. So then I will go quicker now, because we're getting to the end, I think. History can give more strength to what we call now a kind of geological storytelling, you know? We use in geology now also for telling stories, and not only about dinosaurs or big phenomena known to the public opinion, but in general there is a way, because geology is the most historical, in my opinion, and not only my opinion, of all the sciences. If you look at paleontology, if you look at stratigraphy, there is an historical approach that other sciences maybe has less. Well, of course, evolutionary. There are other sciences, of course, they have an historical approach, but volcanology, seismology, they're all using history in different ways. Most of the classic sites for the history of geoscience are also regarded as iconic sites for contemporary research within several disciplines of earth sciences. Here, Aeolian Islands, for example, studied in the 18th century by a series of very good scholars like Spallanzani, understanding phenomena quite early, according to volcanologists today. It's still classic iconic site, but still, if you go to this area, you don't find all this possible reevaluation of the potential that this geosites has. A geosite makes history not only because it helped to define a new revolutionary way of looking at the surface of the planet, or because it was the place where particular theories were proved, but also because these sites can be a place where the theories have been put under test, under verification, not just where they've been discovered. So there are different degrees of importance. And then the historical sites can tell more stories, also related to human activities. Mining and quarrying, for example, is very important areas that has to be put together with the geological studies, in particular in stratigraphy, in order to, because the story related to miners, to mining life, there is literature about it as well, quite wide. It's another world that we have to understand. Popular science, for example, in the late 19th century, trying to communicate geological knowledge, talking about the underground and talking about the life of miners, the life of people living on the ground in general. So coal mines, for example, also not only metallic or. On the other hand, historical places, they're not, for example, the houses of geoscientists, the libraries. They're certainly very important as places, but they've been made by men. They're being constructed in some way, and they cannot be considered historical geosites. There is this little confusion as well about an important place, for example, the house where some scientists have been living and working for his life, his laboratory, and so on. So in conclusion, I just give you a very quick trip to this idea of interdisciplinary aspect of the geosites, and we would like to produce more links, to create links between various disciplines and various knowledge. Not only with all the earth sciences, not only history in different ways and all the earth sciences, this is natural, but also with other cultural aspects. I was mentioning literature, I was mentioning arts, for example. A few days ago, we had a webinar where two historians of art from Poland were talking about the concept of carboniferous, according to the idea of some artist who has been dealing with the world of the mining, in coal mining in Poland, which is now going to disappear because of the energetic shift. And it was fascinating to see these people coming from a completely different background, giving us an interpretation of what is an epoch they called now an era. I would say a cultural concept they called Carbocene instead of the Anthropocene. Now they've been talking in many other cases. The ideas are important. The ideas has to come from different directions and from different skills. And so I would like to emphasize the importance of the collaboration between disciplines, but it's really an open field and it's an open ground of a construction ground in this moment in our discipline. I would like to know what you think about that as a direction of interaction, because one of the worriness is that we can lose each other in too many ways of looking at the problem, no? of the history of geoscience. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Ezio. It was a very inspiring talk, and especially for us who live in geological heritage area. And for those who have more than one discipline in mind also, it was very, very interesting. Tenim alguna pregunta a la sala? Isaac, òbviament.
Moltíssimes gràcies per haver-me citat. Per mi és molt important. Jo no parlo anglès molt a poc. Una contribució a la història de la geologia que se'm va ocórrer l'altre dia, potser és una ximpleria, una tonteria. Estava mirant fotos de quan jo estudiava i veia com anàvem vestits i els aparells que duíem i pensava com anem ara. Jo crec que també seria una cosa interessant començar a cuidar el que és la cultura material de la professió de geòleg. O sigui, la nostra cultura material. Ara ja he vist un canvi que és en unes poques desenes d'anys. Quina roba duíem, com ens movíem, quins aparells feien servir, les brújoles, els magnetòmetres. Tot això es perd i tal. I crec que també és un enfoc, és una contribució així que faig, un enfoc curiós d'aquesta qüestió, la cultura material dels geòlegs. No sé si m'has entès. Capisco?
Ho capito.
Vale.
Inteso. Tu catalan capisco adesso, perché ormai after so long we've been discussing, now I understand. No, thank you. Thank you very much. No, Isaac, you're right. I mentioned material culture. I didn't develop all this possibility of understanding the sign of the material culture, which on one side are very interesting also for the general public to see, for example, how they were dressed, what kind of instruments, what kind of boots they have in. On the other hand, can be a bit misleading, because maybe they just focus on this aspect a bit folkloristic, let's say, no? No, it depends how you use them. They are important, I agree, but it has to be well communicated, no? In a way that you don't see like a sort of strange, bizarre way of talk. For example, when I do the course in History of Mountains and I show the early outfit, the address of the early alpinists, the students smile, because you see these people dressed like they're going to a meeting in the house, or with very bad shoes and so on. This is the representation also. It's not probably what was really, maybe, who knows, this has to be understood better. But no, they're important because you understand the way how these people was facing a new environment to study, for example, and using new instruments, taking these instruments and these tools from other practice much more developed. And for example, mining, again, provides the tools to the geologist. The hammer, but even the compass. The compass, the bussola, the compass is actually the mining compass at the beginning. The inclination of the strata, they use all this. So there is a link very strong. They're not the geologists, it's just an idea in the air that these great scientists had and they put in the book. Maybe looking at the landscape like a geologist now with a perfect understanding of what happened millions of years ago. That's you as a geologist, have this and communicate to us. But at that time, no. They were looking on the ground, they were using the knowledge of the miner. So absolutely, yes. It's a long path. Make us understand that science, in the case of geology, it's complicated and has not given yet definitive answer in many cases, no? And they were trying to understand this also with their knowledge. So material culture is certainly an aspect very important. I agree.
Alguna altra pregunta?
Thank you very much, Ezio, for your interesting lecture and this reflection about the challenges with the history of the sciences regarding to other disciplines. But my question is about a reapproach about these challenges, in the sense of what about the openness of history of geological sciences and earth sciences towards the developments in other realms within the history of science. For example, I find a reluctance to accept in this realm the developments. For example, 2 decades ago we discussed a lot from different perspectives about the geographical term in history of science, and surprisingly, the history of geosciences was relatively reluctant to discuss about this question against the common sense, because if we are talking about geographical term, it seems that the geological sciences or other earth sciences must be a privilege field for a reflection from a geographical viewpoint about the development of science and time. This is an example. Or for example, questions about the rurality associated to science. Surely geosciences are the most rural sciences, maybe share this consideration with some parts of engineering. Okay? So this is very surprising from my viewpoint. I was a historian of geology for time. Personally, I'm devoted to other questions. But in that moment, I found a sort of reluctance, and I don't understand the reason.
Reluctance from the geologists, you mean? From
maybe, but I'm not sure. What do you think about? Because this is this is my viewpoint, but I have commented this viewpoint with other colleagues from other viewpoints, and they're sharing this.
No, well, I understand your topic is quite. It's a contemporary problem, I would say. We live in this as well because we specialized more and more often in particular field of research and study, and I noticed that this idea of interdisciplinarity involves the put yourself a bit on the discussion. You don't have to go to talk with the other community of scholar or people or researcher with the attitude that you have already solved a series of problems within your own research and discipline. You have to ask for help, or better, ask for another view, and in this way see what happens. So, for example, you're talking about geographers. The community of geographers that I know, in Italy mainly, because I didn't deal with geographers out of Italy. Why? I started with deal with them in Italy because they're doing a lot of, in my opinion, research which can give different views of our problems. For example, travels, understanding the landscape. But I found a bit of reluctance to accept also the problems which were what I thought common ground, let's say. I think is a problem due to the excessive specialization that we have now in a series of field of research, and we don't want to have the risk to put everything on the discussion. Dealing with I found less this attitude in young people, on the other hand. So I must praise what I know, the young researchers, because they have an attitude which is more interdisciplinary than people of my age or older. In this sense, this is my experience. So more than reluctance see, there is a reluctance too, but it has to be overcome.
Molt bé, deixaríem aquí, que ja ens hem passat uns 10 minutets. Moltes gràcies a tothom. Ara comencem una taula rodona, que també serà molt interessant, per tant, ho farem de forma immediata. Moltes gràcies, Ezio. Thank you so much.
Gràcies a vous. Thank you.